Testing, 1, 2, testing. We haven't got a level. Can you give me a little word over there too?
Whoa.
Yeah, that sounds like we got something. I can even see the lights here. Let's increase that a bit. Yep, you're grabbing that microphone. There it is.
Oh.
This is an interview with Peter Klynstra in Halifax, Nova Scotia, on Sunday, the 16th of January, 1994. At 8 o'clock in the evening. Hi, Peter.
Hi.
How are you?
Full.
That's the sad part, isn't it? Good. Maybe just a bit of background information just before we get started. Can you tell me when you were born?
1944.
1944. And actual birthday?
March 16th.
Oh. This is a big year for you.
Yes, it is. You can tell that.
I can tell. It's a big one coming up. And where were you born?
Moline, Illinois.
Moline?
Mm-hmm.
M-O-L-I-N-E.
Yeah, like the fake mole for.
Oh, yes. Illinois. I-L-L-I-N-O-I-S.
ILLINOIS, yeah.
Good. Got it. And maybe just a little bit on your educational background. You did undergraduate work
At the University of Illinois
uh-huh.
in architecture.
Oh. And that was
1960 something or other to 1967.
right. You graduated in 67.
Mm-hmm.
And then decided
No, I worked as an architect
uh-huh,
for several years, actually. I went to California. I was in the Navy, finishing up a Naval Reserve stint.
what happened to your voice?
Oh,
Yep, okay. Yeah.
I was finishing up a Naval Reserve stint and got out of the Navy later that year and hitchhiked back to Madison, Wisconsin from California. I didn't actually hitchhike.
Yeah.
Caught a ride from California back to Madison, Wisconsin. And while I was staying overnight in a hotel in Madison, Wisconsin, I noticed a model. I ostensibly was going back to Chicago to work. And I said, these people need help. It was an excellent design, but a lousy model, right? And so I picked the model up. I remember this. I picked the model up and walked over to their office and got a job with them.
And fixed them up. And that was with
Peters and Martinsons in
yes, uh-huh.
Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah. And they were just totally lucky. It was a dynamite firm, just a great design firm. And by total accident, my very, very first job, the first thing I worked on in the office, I was sent off to work for landscape architects, which is unreal because no architect works with. That just never happens.
Yeah.
And it was just total fate that my very first job as an architect was to get sent to work for landscape architects who were doing a children's zoo. And I was doing the architectural components of the zoo with the landscape architects. And while working on that project, I realized they had a lot more fun than we did.
Well, that's nice to know. That's encouraging.
Yeah. So.
And decided to.
No, I probably didn't decide then at all.
Yeah.
No, we'd often did some other things, and I illustrated. I was a cartoonist illustrating. The next job I had after working at this firm for a while was as a cartoonist illustrating math textbooks,
uh-huh.
doing cartoons to illustrate new math textbooks for school kids. And then I got a job with Ambrose Richardson, Severance and Sheeler,
mm-hmm.
which is was a unique architectural firm. Ambrose Richardson was the third person who worked for Skidmore, Owens and Merrill.
Mm-hmm.
You know who they are.
I certainly do.
He hired Merrill.
Mm.
He was the designer. In fact, neither Nate Owens or Owens or Skidmore. Neither of them were designers. And they called up Mies van der Rohe in Chicago and asked if he had any good design students. And his recommendation for Ambrose, which is still on record at in the Skidmore, Owens and Merrill archives, if you want to look it up, is that Ambrose is the only person who ever really understood what I was doing. He's the only student I've ever had who actually got it. So they hired him as a designer. He was the third person that they had there. And the rest of when I worked for him, he was running a design consulting service. And all we did is design projects for architects around the US. And by accident again, what I ended up doing there was doing the site work. Just by accident. I don't know why. Maybe it wasn't an accident, but it was, my first project there was doing the design for the Indianapolis Art Museum, the Eli Lilly Foundation site and stuff. And it was great. I got to do all the design work and pass it off to Sasaki, who did all the working drawings. And so it was by accident my first two jobs. And doing that, I bumped into Phil Lewis, who talked me into going to graduate school in landscape architecture in Madison.
So, which is what you did.
And that's what I did.
68 and 69.
Yep.
Got that really well.
And I worked for Phil at Landscape Limited. And was a giant aardvark at the school, or whatever you call it.
And you were with them for a year?
Yeah, just a little over a year probably. And I lived in Phil's backyard.
An outbuilding.
He had a wonderful little picturesque guest cottage. This just like right out of just so cute, just make you sick. In his backyard, and we lived there. And it had been his office, actually, his first office for a few years. And the idiots had, the heat had gone off one day, and they tried to heat it by boiling water on the stove. And they had raised the humidity so high on the thing that it peeled all the paint off the walls. So it looked like all the paint was just hanging from the walls and ceilings in the whole place when we moved in. And so we got it sort of rent-free for fixing it up for him, and lived there for about a year. And we had two things. My wife had to teach his children art lessons, and I had to fix the cottage up. That was our rent for the year when we lived there. So.
And what kind of projects did you work on with him?
Landscapes Limited just did little projects like all of North America and Alaska, and everyone knows what kind of projects. While I was there, we did a document which was to be a basis for the disposition and the setting of policy on the disposition of public-owned lands in the U.S., which is more than 50% of the surface area of the U.S. And we did a document in 3 months that we put on every senator and representative's desk, which came up to the middle of my chest, about 4 feet tall, the stack of documents. And it was basically a planning document that looked at planning every square inch of the U.S., including Alaska, Hawaii. But the office before had done the upper Mississippi River Basin, which was Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, most of Iowa, Wisconsin. And we had done Alaska, a land use plan for Alaska. And that's the scale of projects that Phil worked on.
And was it more in the line of the documents, of planning documents, or did you do site design work as well?
Actually, that's the office did the big stuff. What I tended to do in the office was the site design. I guess I was the designer while I was there. I don't think there was anyone else. I did the site landscape designs. I did mobile home parks, became a specialty. they sent me off to, and I was one of the few registered mobile home park designers in the U.S.
Now there's a recommendation that you've always wanted to have.
Oh yeah, that's a,
You
can you
too.
back up the tape and we take that? Let's get this out of here. Registered mobile home park designer.
Yeah, there we go. Just what we always thought.
Actually, it was interesting at the time because it was the hot thing.
Mm-hmm.
Factory housing and stuff. Remember, this is before Expo,
Yeah.
and this is things like, or it's around Expo, right?
Yes.
And things had just been done, like Habitat, and factory housing was a big thing. Big companies in the U.S. were doing really incredible things. In fact, that's what I was doing for my graduate thesis in landscape architecture, was the siting of modular housing. I was working with Daryl Morrison on that. He was my thesis advisor, and it had sort of become a specialty of mine. Was this notion of, if you've got these factory modules, what can you do with them to, I guess humanize is the word. Yeah, yes. Yeah, no, that's probably, that's.
And what did you do? How did you solve that problem?
I don't know if I ever solved it. I just worked on it.
What did you do to work at it? How did you attempt to solve it?
Everything we did, when I think back on it, was based on preconceptions and conventional wisdom, which I've come to believe is always wrong. Yeah, it's like, no, what we did it didn't work toward humanizing at all. It just was stupid ideas to make it look better. Superficial stuff.
But maybe you need to go through that in the process of eventually coming to other kinds of understandings.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
What a shame, huh?
What a shame. And from there, you then moved on to work with Hackner Schroeder.
Hackner Schroeder Roslansky. Yes, I did, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and lived in Chicken Ridge, Minnesota. Across the river. It's a wonderful place.
Chicken Ridge.
Chicken Ridge, yeah. Wonderful place.
Sounds good. And were there some outstanding projects there?
Yeah, we worked on, it was also an interesting firm. It was, I went there by choice rather than, because we were doing schools, but not like, they didn't do things like most architects did. We had a full-time education person on staff. I mean, an education researcher, systems researcher. We had, if we were doing schools, that's the way the firm did it. And if we were doing, they took things very seriously. Very incredibly well-organized firm.
And was that basically what they did with schools in?
We did schools and universities, and university buildings, which are schools, I guess. What else did we do? We must have done other stuff.
A few other things. And from there, we're moving through this at a breakneck pace here, but I'm trying to get you to Canada here.
Oh yeah, I came to Canada from Chicken Ridge, Minnesota. Okay. So we're almost here.
Good. Okay. And that was to, you were saying earlier, to Montreal? Yeah,
I was hired by Sunderland Preston Simard, a planning firm that were based in Montreal. Golden Sunderland, John Preston and Jacques Simard of the Simard family, the viola da gamba player with the Montreal String Quartet. You've heard him on the radio before.
I should have.
Interesting gentleman, I thought. Renaissance man, musician. Got interested in planning, went off to Harvard to get a degree in planning, had a degree in classics, spoke Greek, Latin, and every other language, of course.
And you had an opportunity to work with this man?
Not really. He never came into the office.
He was too busy studying.
But when we were working on the Moncton plan, he did the research on the history of Moncton from original Acadian documents from his own library. So, things aren't done that way anymore, I don't
No,
think.
probably not. Probably not. Was there an outstanding project there that you remember?
There. Well, there went on for a long time because that firm was bought by CBCL. And so really I stayed there for 12 or 13 years. Not in Montreal because I came to the Halifax office to finish the Moncton plan, but we did plans, urban design schemes for Lucerne. We did, I worked with, we worked with Joe Bogdan as our architect on planning and urban design schemes. So we did the Yonge Street redevelopment plan. You know, John Preston was involved with that with Joe Bogdan for Toronto. We did the Lucerne plan for Lucerne, Quebec. We did the plan for Saint-Jean, Quebec. We did the plan for did lots of interesting urban design schemes, just sort of ethereal things, and redevelopment schemes for buildings and stuff.
Now, when you were doing this would have started about 1971, 72.
Yeah, 70.
Was this a very early time for doing those types of plans?
No, it's the kind of things that were being done then. Everyone, and buildings hadn't, campuses and things had come together as super buildings in the late 60s, early 70s, and they hadn't yet flown apart back into campus, and bigger was better still. And so a lot of what we were doing was these big urban design schemes that brought things together. The DND Saint-Jean, the language school in Saint-Jean, Quebec. And we made the incredibly disastrous recommendation to tear down all these beautiful buildings and these old icky buildings, right? And build one nice new mega, you know, mega building. I didn't personally have anything to do with making that recommendation.
You want that on record.
Yeah. But we worked on the scheme and yeah.
And were there, when you were doing the plans, were there some kind of innovative approaches that your company was taking at that time that was sort of noteworthy, or as you say, it was more the kind of the idea of the mega?
It was really Beaux-Arts stuff. It was, I don't think there was anything innovative about it. It was line, tone, texture, form, color, space, balance. It was just do it.
Okay, so then that was 1984. Then you decided to start your own company. Was that about the same time?
No, I mean, I was still, well, no, 12 years later. Yeah, I was at CBC. I worked on all kinds of stuff. I did, you know, worked on everything there. I did lots of, I guess I stayed there because we had lots of neat projects.
But you were also at that time teaching at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design?
Yeah, I started teaching part-time there, and it's still in.
In environmental planning?
Yeah.
And what do you teach?
I teach landscape design as an elective for environmental planners, so they have some kind of an introduction to it, because every year 2 or 3 at least, I think, go on to graduate school in landscape architecture when they leave this undergraduate accredited planning program. I teach professional practice and different studios. Usually one studio a year. So one term it's like one course, and then the next term I'm half-time basically.
That's a pretty heavy load when you're trying to...
Yeah, ask everyone in my office about it. They never know where to find me.
Or if they don't know where to find you, they can always check at the school.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy that?
Oh yeah, no, it's essential.
What are some of the highlights of it for you?
Well, I mean, you can get the students to teach you anything you want.
You find that they're good sources of...
Oh yeah. I teach construction too, and we've got all this computer equipment. And I told them they had one term to teach me how to use it. I mean, And they did. They were great. I mean, they worked as a
Yeah, that's the one interesting part about teaching, isn't it? Is
Yeah.
how much you learn.
oh, it's fantastic.
And I'm sure that the keeping up to date on what's new in the field in order to teach them is a very
Yep.
inspiring activity.
Yeah, no, it's yeah.
Keeps you going.
Yeah.
Does it?
Yeah.
Are you part of the international teaching?
Yeah.
What is
CELA, yes. Yeah, I'm a member of that.
what is that? Council for Education.
Educators of Landscape Architecture. Yeah.
And you meet with your American counterparts then?
No, it's sort of funny. I know a few people fairly well who teach, and I see them every once in a while. Very, very seldom, but I've never gone to the meetings, and there's just too many things to get involved in. I've never
You don't work on joint curricula or anything like that?
For course, if I'm working on a course, I poke around and find someone, and we share outlines and stuff like that and talk to people. But
is that how you basically do develop your curriculum then? Is sort of on your own and knowing the people that you know that teach something similar? Is that?
Actually, I do it by trying it and finding out what works.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to know when it's not working and when it is working. So.
And so I think what my question is getting at, is it a Canadian base for what you're teaching? Is it sort of a Canadian model of some sort? Or?
No, it's not really. No, it's not really a Canadian model, I don't think. Although 2 or 3 people that I know fairly well that I talk to are educators in Canadian schools, but I don't think that's what I rely on for a model.
What do you?
I mean, I don't know. We try, and I guess I rely on myself and the student.
And and sort of your own training then, kind of what you've learned or how you learned it? Or,
No,
it's totally inspirational.
Nice. I'm not sure. Where does
this stuff come from?
No, I know where it comes from, actually. In every individual thing, these breakthrough ideas you have, and then you try and get different ideas across to students, and you try it 4 or 5 times different ways, and pretty soon something works. And then you figure out, you can actually teach people how to do certain things. And it's trial and error, like I say.
In terms of methodology.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, let's see, where are we here? About 1985. Just a minute. 1984. That's when you started your own company?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And what did you? Why did you make that choice?
I don't know.
Did you feel you had some things that needed to be done differently?
No, I guess everyone else was having a midlife crisis. I wanted one too. I wasn't going to be cheated out of something like that. No. I don't know. No, I just wanted to try it. But now I've done it. No one can make me do it again.
Was that a good experience for you?
Oh yeah, no, it was fun. It was fun.
What kind of projects did you undertake? Did you undertake things that different than what you had before?
Well, yes, very different, because when I was at CBCL in Sunderland, Preston, Samar, we had, at the time, we were the largest for about a year back in the late 70s. We were the largest planning company in Canada. We had offices in Vancouver. We had offices in Southern Ontario. We had offices in Toronto, Halifax, all of the Atlantic provinces. And I flew around all the time. I was sort of running the landscape architecture group in all of those offices. And I was working on large projects that what was primarily an engineering company would get. So I was working on environmental things, but we did do a lot of tourism planning, like the tourism plan for Grossmoor, and I did a lot of community planning for mid-sized communities and some very small community plans, which were a lot of fun to do. Did a lot of work in Newfoundland. I was on a plane all the time for 12 years. And when I started my own company, I did something incredible. I mean, absolutely, totally different. I quit because I wanted to work on a small project. Well, it was funny. I wanted to work on a project that I just finished working on last year. This started in 1984, but it looked like an incredibly interesting project come up that the firm I'm with now wanted me to go in on with them to do this work. And this was an individual I'd been working with for years. We had worked on CMHC demonstration projects with Gary Hack, with the architect I'm with now. And we'd really worked well together. He wanted me to go, but the firm wouldn't let me. I think it was really, this was the real impetus. Decided I couldn't go in on that with this individual, that I had to be with them, period. And I decided I'd rather do the project. Whether we won it or lost it, I'd rather do it with this other person, that it would be more fun. And so I quit and started my own firm, and my own firm went with the other individual. We got the job, and we just finished working on it. And we're still working on it, really. We're working on implementation within the project, yeah. We're still. This is a Bedford waterfront, which had some bad press here and there, and it's sort of a strange project in a way, because we've learned a lot since then. This was 1984 we started this. And if we were starting now, we'd be able to tell the board. We'd be stronger with the board. We'd not let them push us around as much as they did at the time. And but we had some ideas, like they were going to dredge the mouth of the Bedford Basin and haul the fill out into the ocean and dump it. And at the same time, they had another project that they were thinking of totally separately, to do some landfill to create Bedford had been totally cut off from the waterfront by the tracks. And I sort of put this, what is a rather simple idea, I think, together. Why don't we make the land out of the dredge fill? And everyone said, wow, that's a good idea. And that's what we did. So it was a rather interesting project from environmental and design and everything sort of view.
And what is that something that other places haven't done? Was this sort of a first in terms of that approach?
Other people have probably done it. Mm-hmm. We did some things that other people have used subsequently. We tried different things with sort of different ways of mixing dredge fill and other fill and flocculating sedimentation tanks and adding different materials to them to get different kinds of consistencies of loon ship. I mean, we tried lots of stuff. It was fun.
And the solution is?
I don't know. I mean, it works. I mean, we created land, and it's got housing on it, and people are living in it. And the new political regime is upset because the board spent $11 million and is only getting $5 million back for the land they're selling. But they're forgetting the mini acre park that was created, and they're attributing no value to a 10-acre waterfront public park. They're attributing no value to a new waterfront roadway that connects to a new phase, which will is actually commercially viable in a private sense. So it's an interesting project.
But if you can live through sort of the political ups and downs of that at some point in time it should shake down to the realities of the positive things that were done.
It got us into waterfront planning, which is what we really do a lot of now, and it got us into interesting projects like Pictou, where we took what we learned on 5 or 6 other waterfronts and were able to tell people how to organize a board and how to work with a community and how to create a waterfront that residents would actually not have to go through some kind of leap of faith to believe that it was their waterfront. That you're able to get a community to I hate the term buy into a project or feel some owner. There must be a better term. No, just to know that it's part of the town without thinking about it, without saying, oh, that's for tourists. We've been able to do this in a way that had enough respect for the residents and the natural structure and history of the town everyone got on side. And so this sleepy little town that really was not doing very well, they had like a 30% vacancy rate on their main street in the shops, now has, after 2 or 3 years of the work we've done there, built a new main street, marina, tourist facilities, and the spin-off off of this, new restaurants, pubs. It's 60-some new businesses at last count, and way over 100 new permanent jobs with the expenditure of very little public money. It really has made a difference. Not just a monumental difference in this town. And so the other projects just led to figuring out how to do it right.
And giving you the sense of knowledge of being able to take hold in terms of, as you're saying, directing the town.
Or telling them how to take hold.
Yeah.
The reality is we want no hold at all. They've got to take hold of it. Yeah.
And is this something that you think that landscape architects can be particularly good at?
I think they probably could. Yeah, I think so. I think they could. I think people are still a bit too grounded in what stuff looks like. They're still a bit too focused on the superficial, on the old Beaux-Arts line, tone, texture, form, color, space, balance. They still somehow think that how something looks makes a difference.
What are you saying, that that's not necessarily that important?
I think it's probably way down the list of what's important. Yeah.
In terms of what a landscape architect does.
Yeah, I think so. I think, in Pictou, if you go there, someday, you may go and you will sit on a bench from hell. This is a bench where the angle between the back and the seat is less than 90 degrees. This is the most excruciating thing to sit on you've ever seen. It also looks uncomfortable. But it was made by some young kids who were out of work in Pictou, right? Not very well supervised. We figured that out. We figured that out a little better later on, and we figured out how to control their enthusiasm. But they built the bench, and they take their friends down here and say, "I built that bench," and most landscape architects would be rude about the quality of the bench. I think in fact, I may have been rude at first, but not to the students themselves.
So are you suggesting that there needs to be perhaps a new kind of mindset?
I don't think it's new. I think other people are doing it. I think if you've got a project for public spaces in New York, they practice landscape architecture with a firm that varies between 20 and 50 people, and they never probably have ever had more than one designer in the traditional sense of the term on staff. They have filmmakers, geographers, art historians doing the work, and they sort of know that, you know, what color the bench is painted just isn't that important.
So where does that all go though then? Where does that, I mean, isn't the color of the bench important?
Might be, but it's only superficially important. I mean, there's no reason to have it bad or ugly, but if that's all you're focusing on is cleaning up the superficial appearance, it has no meaning at all. It's just going to get, you know, the paint will just wear off. I mean, it's it's not what it's all about at all.
What is it all about then?
I don't know.
Is it a much more of a sociological base?
Probably something. Yeah, I think landscape architects should go back to school. Yeah, probably social anthropology or anything.
Wonder if they even need to go back to school. I wonder if that can just be done through
Sure.
interaction.
Yeah. School's probably the worst place to go.
But in order to develop a different approach or a different kind of understanding.
Yeah, I think.
In order to do what? That's the end product.
I don't know if there is an end product.
But
I think that maybe that's the problem, that landscape architects focus on products, very product oriented, and there never really is a product in the landscape. It's really a process, and
but if it's not a proper looking bench that's the right color, then what is it? What have you done in Pictou that's?
We know that the benches will get thrown away and someone will build a bench that you can actually sit on or buy some better ones. Okay?
Yeah.
But as part of the process, the bench from hell, the benches from hell were a very important part of the process, looking back on it, because it convinced the person in charge of the project that they could actually do this themselves with the people they had, and that they could do everything they needed, right?
So the landscape architect's role in all of this is to help the community understand.
Help them set up the structure for set up the structure for getting this done. Helping them. We spend a lot of time on projects now, trying to figure out how to keep the money in the community. We cast the light fixtures in the foundry in Pictou. Amherst Main Street, I cast the light fixtures in the foundry in Amherst, designed by a person who was living in Amherst. Convinced the mayor that if they were going to have street trees, that when I was asked the question, why don't we have street trees? And I said, well, because I don't think you take it seriously, so I'm not going to put them in, they'll just die and you'll be unhappy with it, right? And he said, well, we really want trees, we'll take it seriously. And I said, well, this is how seriously you have to take it. You have to take your town staff and you have to send them off to the nursery to pick the trees out themselves. And they have to plant them themselves. and everybody in the town has to understand that they're alive and they need care, and you have to take it seriously. And he said, well, that's what we'll do then. And so he got the whole staff together. He sent the town planner off to a nursery to pick the trees out personally for the town. Got the whole staff assembled. And they plow their Main Street sidewalks there. He said, the first person that hits one of these trees with a snowplow is fired. The union, you have to have a warning or something. This is your warning. This is your first warning. And he called them back 10 minutes later and said, no, this is your second warning, right? So when you actually hit it, you're fired, right? And the first person that did was fired. And lo and behold, it's amazing to see how well the street trees are doing in Amherst, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, figure that one out.
I mean, most towns just have a hell of a time with it. Look at Montreal. You were there. Did you notice all the sick, dead trees? I mean, no one takes it seriously, right?
Because there's somebody else's. Because there's not that connection.
Yeah.
Somebody else planted them.
Hey, in Amherst, they're doing beautifully, trust me.
Yeah.
And hey, no snowplower operator hits them anymore. So no, it's I think landscape architects are too product oriented.
Rather than, is it process?
Yeah.
And is that something new that landscape architects need to be looking at? Is that?
I don't. It's certainly not new. I mean, it was something that I could sort of see a long time ago, and I don't know how to just put it into words, but I mean, it's something I wanted to learn about, and I lucked into by accident a young Canadian landscape architect named Mary Tupling, who works in Vancouver. Last I bumped into her, came into my office looking for work, and I said, "Well, we just don't need anybody." And I said, "So, where have you worked?" "Well, I just worked for a project for public spaces in New York." And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute! You're hired." And I mean, she retaught me how to do it in a pretty short time. I mean, she was good. Is good.
She's not with you.
No, that was years ago. She was,
And what when you say she retaught you, what did she reteach you?
Well, I mean, I was able to sort of learn how to do landscape architecture all over again from her.
In terms of process?
A different way of looking at it, yeah. It's more of the project for public spaces way of looking at it.
What does that mean?
Not from a traditional design point of view.
What does that mean?
So just more of a social point of view.
More of an understanding of who you're designing for?
Yeah, it's, I guess, what I always tell my students is that, do you understand the difference between humanism and humanitarianism as philosophies? But no one does. Right? So we talk about that. And, well, humanitarianism doesn't work as a design philosophy. Humanism does. I mean,
can you describe that difference for me?
well, humanitarian, okay.
Sure, give me your lecture.
No, I can't, I won't give you a lecture. I won't give you the lecture. How do I do that? No lecture.
Okay.
10 words or less. Okay. Humanitarianism, the example, that's the way to do it. Salvation Army, Goodwill Industries, or whatever you call it.
Sure.
You know what those
I
two.
know Goodwill. Yeah.
Okay, you know Goodwill and you know Salvation Army. Yeah. Ostensibly, they do the same thing, right? They take used products, they recondition, they sell them, and they help people who have trouble while they're doing this. That's the real goal, is to help. Salvation Army, humanitarian. It used to be, I don't know if they still do anymore, but to get a room in the Salvation Army hostel, you had to sign an oath of abstinence. So the whole notion is that you improve mankind by doing away with the bad stuff, the evils, right? Humanism improves mankind. Same goal again. You're trying to improve people by celebrating the positive aspects rather than by trying to do away with the bad. Exact inverse, right? Design, if you think about it, has the two things that really screw up design and really are the greatest enemies of landscape architecture are value judgments and preconceptions, which are necessary in the humanitarian sort of approach to things. By definition, if you're doing away with what's bad,
If you do away with something that's bad.
Yeah, by definition, I mean, if you're trying to do away with something that's bad, you've had to make the value judgment of what's bad, and you have a preconception of you've by definition bought into those big enemies of design. Humanitarianism, you can celebrate whatever seems to be good. Humanism, rather, you can celebrate whatever seems to be good. You don't have to predetermine going into a project what's good and what's bad. You really can just have a good time, and that's what works in design. And I think, you walk through cities and you see humanitarian work everywhere in design. Keep off the grass. I mean, that's a sign no landscape architect should ever use.
Okay, wow.
Key Commission.
Yes, Key Commission.
Annapolis Royal Historic Gardens. Interesting project. Went out on a limb, always as the case with Key Commission. The build a couple $1 million project for $600,000. Had to convince the province to give the money to the town rather than go through a normal contracting process. Got the whole town involved, had meetings, a community of then 500 people, had 300 or 400 people out to meetings, had convinced them that if the whole town wasn't a garden, that if you didn't, again, the mindset is everything. If you think of that as something over there for tourists, it's going to fail. If the whole town isn't a garden and this is just a spot of a garden town, that'll work. But if it's just a garden in an ugly town, you're toast. Got the whole town involved in it. Ran out of money. Opening day, they were out of money. Had no sod. Had all these politicians coming to cut ribbons and stuff. And the townspeople donated their lawns to sod the gardens. So it definitely, that one worked.
What year was that?
Right around 1980, somewhere around there. And so it was an interesting project from lots of ways.
Have you done any other historic gardens?
No.
That wasn't the start of something great in historic gardens.
No, I've done management plans for heritage sites. There's nothing historic about the Annapolis Royal Historic Gardens.
Oh, isn't there?
In fact, I call them the Annapolis Royal Historic Gardens. No, there's nothing historic about them except that it was probably a very old Acadian settlement on that site. And there are some dike lands and some Acadian developments there. But it's just a garden. It's a tourist site. And it's just developed as a tourist site. So, but that was a big project. It was a neat project.
The history of the profession of landscape architecture. Who were some of the individuals who influenced you?
It's funny when I was starting out, I was trying to think of the answer to this question, right? And Big Luke Enright was one. He was just happened to sit next to him on my first job, and he's now a senior partner at the Architects Collaborative. Just an incredibly talented individual, and just accidentally in this 4-person office, I was, the 2 partners and the 2 employees were Steve Enright and myself. And he's definitely an interesting individual. He's and Lebbeus Woods, I sat next to in my next job. I sat next to Lebbeus Woods and worked with him on projects. And you don't know who that is, but he's gone on to be, now he's considered one of the foremost sort of futuristic architects. And he's in New York City, and he does these incredible drawings and future cities and ethereal drawings and stuff. And he's become one of the thinkers of architecture, right? But he was the draftsman who sat beside me in this job, and those are just 2 people. I mentioned Daryl Morris and Phil Lewis and Ambrose Richardson, yeah, and I mentioned Mary Tupling.
And what was important about them to you, or what is now?
They're like all people who teach you something. They're just incredibly interesting people who looked at things a different way than you look at them. Isn't?
And thereby giving you that other perspective on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Were there any Canadians that have influenced you?
Mary Tupling.
And she's the lady who had worked in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, maybe we can talk about your contributions to the profession of landscape architecture in Canada. What do you feel are your contributions?
I couldn't think of any, but I have talked several very good students into going into landscape architecture, and several of those will be very, very good landscape architects. Several of those people, and I have actually convinced some people to believe that less design might be better than more design. If that's a contribution, I'm not sure.
You feel it is, it's a contribution. What about in terms of, that's certainly in terms of philosophy, in terms of your projects, what do you think are projects that you have been a major contribution to Canada?
That was a hard question. Important Canadian projects. I had my students do that once. I had them write a paper, and I sent them out to identify and do a report on a truly Canadian landscape project, design project. And they were scurrying around like mad, right? It's like, I think there were about 12 students in that class at the time. So there were 12 different projects and 12 reports in. None of them were able to convince anybody that the projects they had come up with were truly Canadian. They couldn't really put their paws on why this project was truly. But one woman, who I believe is a computer consultant in Toronto now, I'm not sure. She's really quite a brilliant person, actually. She took this very seriously, and she was the only one who was able to convince us that the project that she picked was truly Canadian, that she had all of these reasons. And she picked what's really sort of funny that she picked it, because Gordon Ratcliffe, a landscape architect from Toronto, who I worked with for several years, who I hired, and that's the reason he came down here. The project he worked on just before he came was the Ryerson skating rink in Toronto. And that was the project that she picked. And she was able to basically convince the class. She was the only one who could convince the class that it was truly a Canadian project. So I still remember that, and I couldn't get that out of my mind when I was trying to think of Canadian projects, because what project is truly Canadian, right? I mean, it's like Reinhardt said, most of the landscape architects are European trained, you know, the people in the basis of the profession. And then the rest, the next cadre, were all US trained. And then the next are all influenced by these European and US trained people. And what they look at is they sort of, I think we're just getting out of that silly international style stuff that had taken over architecture, that sort of age of communication. That's that whole notion that one size fits all. That concept gave us the boo-boo and other great design there. Yeah.
Very great design. Yeah.
We know what that's good for. But she was able to build a fairly good intellectual case for the skating rink. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I tried part of those arguments on I think it was Strong or Moorhead or one of the people of the firm that did it, and all of the sort of philosophical design intricacies that she had read into it. Mm-hmm. And, oh gosh, that's a neat idea, was the reaction, right? But the motivation behind it was turned out to be much more superficial than the philosophical stuff she had read into it. But her argument still stands, and it's rock from the Canadian Shield, this sort of urban forest, but just the notion of skating as a Canadian notion, as an activity, like what were the truly Canadian activities? She tried to decide. That haven't been totally co-opted,
While you're kind of on that track in terms of where your mind is at, I wonder if you could please explain to me what you think is Canadian landscape architecture. Is there such a thing?
I think there probably is. I don't know. That's what I said. I couldn't come up with an answer for that.
Of that, like of a site, but just Canadian landscape architecture.
I'm sure there is, and I'm sure that someday someone will come up with it, just like the great Canadian novel or the great. It's there. Just I'm sure no one's done it.
What components do you think that it has? What's it made up of?
I don't know. Do you remember? Do you remember the CBC competition on writing new words for the national anthem? What, 15 years ago or something, or 18 years ago, maybe, I don't know. About the time you were in Halifax, 20 years ago. No.
Yours was on tape.
No. Sorry. You'll erase that. Yeah. When you were two.
Yeah.
When you were two.
My memory is really good,
yeah. Your mother will remind you, right?
Okay.
They had the entry that I liked that they sang on the CBC was, "Oh Canada, my home in virgin land, kissed by the sun, but only on the hand."
Are these the elements for Canadian landscape architecture?
No. But her notion, the philosophy behind her words for the song was that she went through what is Canada, right? Well, she decided it was too much virginity. The woman who had said these words to the song was all these vast open spaces and stuff, right? And there was a lot of it hadn't been corrupted by any kind of thought yet. So maybe there is some kind of uncorrupted landscape architecture, which is Canadian. And I think a notion that that maybe Canadians will be able to grasp before other people would be this notion of undifferentiated universal open space. This idea that I learned a lot about design. I was doing a parking lot. I was working with an engineer who was expanding a parking lot at Peggy's Cove. This is where I learned about undifferentiated universal open space as a very strong, viable concept in design. And we designed this new parking lot, expanded, did I say expanded parking lot? At Peggy's Cove, this rather pristine tourist site that everybody's been schlepped out to in Nova Scotia, right? And
Even I saw it when I was 2.
exactly, when you were 2, you were there. And you still remember it, right? And we designed this parking lot. We designed it, and with a very simple goal to increase the number, maximize the number of cars. Increase wasn't exactly the term we were getting. We worked our buns off on this. We did it every possible way. We fiddled and foiled and turned, and we finally didn't have the best parking lot. It certainly wasn't the most convenient parking lot, but we were positive it had the absolute maximum number of cars. And the new expanded parking lot was paved and the lines put on and everything. And then we did some counts and stuff. And then someone noticed, some brilliant person noticed, that the smaller gravel, totally undesigned parking lot in an average day last year had more cars on it, actually parked on it, than we were able to get on our expanded designed parking lot. The reality is people will make things work that you can't imagine if you apply standards and normal design techniques to things. And the whole thing was just that was a nice eye-opener for me, that the new expanded parking lot held fewer cars than the older, smaller gravel parking lot. Go figure, right? It's the perversity of mankind, right? No, I think this notion of the universal undifferentiated open space, the undesigned space, this notion that you got a big grass field, you can play softball on it, soccer, cricket, football.
Skating with no intervention.
Yeah, what else can we do there? We can run around, walk the dog, jog, badminton, whatever, right? I mean, we could keep naming activities all night long. Picnic, just everything, right? Croquet, bocce ball, bowls. Stop, right? No. You put a basketball backstop and some bases on it. What can you do there?
2 things.
Baseball, softball. That's what you can do there. Softball. You can't even play baseball because it's the wrong regulation size, and the league won't play that. Every time you design something, you more than halve the number of things that can go on. It's some kind of geometric progression.
That's right. Inverse.
Yeah, it's logarithmic. No, I think there's a Canadian notion of design there that someone will discover someday. Or maybe someone you're going to interview's already discovered that. And we can declare them the great Canadian landscape architect. Yeah.
I think it's a curious question. Because what is it based on? What is Canadian landscape architecture based on? What are the principles it's based on? Are they different from any place else? And are they manifested in any different way?
Well, we have a chance to make them different. Mm-hmm. We could be the humanist landscape architects. We could be the people who know how to deal with universal undifferentiated open space. We could be the people that enter the process with no value judgments and preconceptions. Because, if we're the peacekeepers, right? What values make Canadians seen as good peacekeepers? They got to be the same kind of values, right? Maybe that is what we should be. Maybe that's the notion we should be seizing as the basis for Canadian landscape architecture.
There could be a new philosophical base then becomes the
That,
practical one.
that's not based in the value judgments and preconceptions that come out of the old systems of teaching landscape architecture and landscape design.
And is that something that can actually be taught in terms of landscape architecture that the Canadian schools could be doing, or is that something that's CSLA could be doing?
Yeah, it's probably the schools. See, the problem. No servants. Do you want to serve? Do you have room for a short servant? No.
Sure.
No.
Yes, definitely room for a servant.
No. I'm really upset with the way schools are going in terms of becoming more and more trade school oriented and more fewer and fewer electives, more and more. I mean, when I went through school, I was never seen around the architecture school. I mean, it was, in fact, one of the interesting things that happened to me when I was an undergraduate was I was working in the pottery studio, and the head of the ceramics department called me into his office for a talk. And he said, Peter, you just haven't been holding up your end of the thing. You're doing lots and pots and stuff, but you've only fired one kiln this term. You haven't assisted in most of the kiln firings. You haven't made your share of the clay. You haven't, he was going on the things I hadn't done, right? And he said, if you're going to finish with a degree in ceramics, you have to do as much work as the other people. And I said, I'm not a ceramics student. I'm an architecture student. I'm just here for the fun of it. There's this long silence, this pause. My God. He thought I just wasn't doing quite as much as the full-time ceramics majors. And I was just taking a 2-credit elective in ceramics. One course. He couldn't. Well, anyway. And
so you feel that there's too much of a narrowing?
Way too much narrowing. Way too much narrowing. I think probably undergraduate programs in landscape architecture should be done away with. They should be forced. Anyone who wants to do LA should be forced to take classics or philosophy or something,
or
anything. Exactly. Yeah, something. Sociology. Get a degree in that. Do something else, and then maybe if you want to get a graduate degree in landscape architecture, go ahead and do it. But it's really disgusting to see. I mean, even in the planning program that I teach, students have room for 2 or 3 electives, and I'm actually a little depressed when they take my electives. Because again, most of my better students come out of the art programs, and they really are taking landscape design and professional practice as a real elective. They do the best work. The planning students, somehow, because it's in the planning department, it's, they're all caught up in this required course, and they're trying to figure out what elective is going to help them with their job the most.
But you can't blame them for that.
Well, no, you can blame them for that. It's real. Well, no, I guess you can blame the people that are directing them for that. But Harvard Graduate School of Business did a study a few years ago where they looked at all of their students, how they had done after they got out of the Harvard Graduate School of Business.
Yeah.
And of course, they divided them into three little graphs. One where the curve of their rise in business and their profession just kept on going up forever, right? He ended up as the Secretary of State or the President of, or the CEO of Godco, right? And then there's another group whose rise went up and up and up and leveled off at somewhere, right? And then there's the people who went up and then down, okay? And they were trying to figure out, the whole study was to try looking at, in admissions, what are the characteristics of the entering students who kept going up, right? What were the common characteristics? It's an interesting study, actually. Were there any common characteristics? Well, there weren't any. Well, there was one. One common characteristic of those students. Their undergraduate degree coming in had been in classics. And that was the only thing, not race, not economic background, not age, sex, nothing. One and no geographic commonality, nothing. One commonality. Their undergraduate work in bidding classics, which I think is something we can all, I mean, there's something there. And all the interesting people I know have shifted careers drastically at least once or twice. And I mean, it's a little depressing to see people with a technician kind of attitude being forced into these things from the day they start university.
Well, on a cheerier note, how do you see the profession of landscape architecture moving and changing in the future? What do you see the future to be? Any idea what the profession could do? If there's some areas that it's that it's not in now that it could be in, that could make a major change? Or do you see that there's going to be, 50 years from now, will there still be landscape architects, or will they be called something else or doing something else? Or?
Sure, there will. I think the medical profession, let's look at another profession that went through a drastic change. I mean, a cataclysmic change a few years ago in Canada. They had been selecting individuals for admission to med school on a rather amazing homogenous basis. And they realized that what they were getting into the profession were an amazingly homogenous group of people. Imagine that, yeah. And that they started to realize this was causing problems. Imagine that. Well, it's just, hey, imagine they actually realized it, okay? And they realized that we have been very short-sighted. And they, over a period of 1 or 2 years, totally changed the admission requirements to med schools. Before 1970 something, every med school in Canada had an absolute age limit for admission of 30 years old. You had to have a science background. I mean, all that was thrown out the door. And the profession is incredibly, has benefited incredibly already, just in, like 10 years of figuring out that they needed to do something drastically different. Still, they'd done it for so long that it's still going to take another 15 years to move through. But it will. That's fast. That's no time at all. I mean, 15 years is...
So you're suggesting that that's perhaps what should happen with landscape architecture?
Well, it's got to start with the education. And it's got to be opened up, and it's got to be made more of an education. And it's got to be, and if we did all of those things, I think, and invited more people into it because it was more of an education, and if we took the focus off of training for a job at the end of 4 years and put the focus on education and expanded the definition of what a landscape architect is to be all kinds of things, like Reinhardt said earlier at dinner. I mean, what landscape architects did in Europe when he was training was work on all the big issues in everything from the beginning. That's what they did, right? It was they were part of a team that were working on things, right? It was the vision that a lot of people have had for the profession. I think that they're part of a large team and that they have a certain body of knowledge, but they have a way of looking at it Um, I think it's been a design profession, and design has been the discipline, and I think that's maybe the mistake, now that I think about it, that maybe what we can do is move landscape architecture, and maybe it can be a discipline of its own, a way of organizing knowledge and solving problems. And if it were a discipline like biology, like whatever, then I think landscape architects would be back to working on everything again. It would be an education, and we could get lots more people in it, and then everyone would know about the. I don't think this changes the basic values and the basic tenets of the profession. The brochure. Let's not forget the brochure. I don't think anything that you said in the brochure. I don't think anything you said in the brochure changes because of this. Okay. I think the philosophical stuff, the tenets, the purpose and stuff, all the same, right? But rather than approaching it from a design discipline, it should be a landscape architecture discipline.
What would that be?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's what is the way we organize knowledge? How do landscape architects organize knowledge that's different than other pieces? We fold them up into. I see. We fold knowledge up into 1, 2, 3, 4. We fold it up into 8 panels, right? And
people fold it
in 2 or 6, right? Yeah, here. No, I mean, someone who's really studied zeitetics, the science of organizing knowledge, will work out. Yeah, we'll go through landscape architecture, and we'll figure out how landscape architects organize knowledge, and we'll apply that to the education of landscape architects, and that will be wonderful. Somehow, right? Do I believe that?
For an instant.
No, I think it's probably in reorganizing the way we look at, or figuring out how we look at it that's different. The notion of zeitetics is that regardless of the discipline you apply, that a biologist and a landscape architect, okay, if given the same problem, will arrive at the same answer. If it's the right answer. They will go through different routes to get there, right? And it's looking at the route they go through, okay, to get there, which is how you can figure out how they organize knowledge. And it's looking at where they have to go around things is where you can use this to identify holes in knowledge. So if you're really trying to solve a problem, you can figure out what you don't know to get to a solution. I think the things we don't know as landscape architects are pretty obvious. I mean, we don't know. I think we deal with people a lot and how people act in the land, but we don't know a lot about sociology and stuff like that. We have a lot of preconceptions about how people act. And they're probably, a lot of the conventional wisdom we apply is probably just wrong.
And that could be changed through education?
Might be.
Or through actual work experience?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, part has to be done through education, of course, because if everyone still goes through a design program and works with professors who believe that what something looks like is what's important. I mean, a graphic designer, I mean, you spent a lot of time with a graphic designer who did this, right? And I'll bet they told you that what it looks like isn't the main thing. It's how the information gets transmitted to people is the important thing. That's what you're really after, is to make it. I mean, if you ever want to talk to the classic case of this, and the people that designers frequently get in to talk about how design works on the wrong preconceptions, are the people that did the Ponderosa steakhouses. You know, you've heard the story. You know, and we don't have enough tape for that.
I think we do.
The whole notion is they did thousands of. They had they wanted people to come in, buy up one on the menu. You know, one more. You know, they wanted to make a decision here, but when they got up to actually order to buy the next most expensive thing on the menu, they wanted you to eat fast and get out to make room in the restaurant. That's what the designers were instructed by the Ponderosa Steakhouse people. That's what Ponderosa thought they would make a successful restaurant, and the designers did it. I mean, designers know how to do things. Like I always tell my students, you can make people do anything you want them to do. You just better be damn sure you know what you want them to do, that it's the right thing. I mean, I can design a space. I can make you stop, walk, look anywhere I want you to look. I can make you walk any way I want you to walk. I can make you think what I want you to think when you're walking through that space. But I better be sure. And so the Ponderosa Steakhouse people did this, and people were it was working perfectly. They used all the graphic tricks, you know, that reverse text is not remembered as long as positive text. This is rather an interesting graphic notion right here, because landscape architecture, you downplay architecture and play up landscape. It's what you remember. And that's sort of an interesting graphic notion. Every graphic designer knows that reverse text isn't remembered as long as positive text. So they put the price in negative in the original Ponderosa and the menu thing in positive. And they made the prices put them up high, so your head was going up as you read up the menu, and the highest price ones were on top. And your head was going up and you read what you wanted and you were looking at the price, but by the time you got up to order, you forgot the price and they were displayed in reverse order. I mean, they knew it. They were clever in the extreme, and people did. They actually did surveys. They know that people moved up one when they ordered. They went out and they sat in these chairs. They had them sit slightly forward, warm colors down below. And if you remember the old, no one else. Tell me you never went there, please. But good. Hold that as a point of honor for the rest of your life. You had this terrible food, right? And you sat on this terrible, uncomfortable chair, which was comfortable while you ate. But as soon as you were done, you sat back in the chair was the wrong angle for sitting and having a cup of coffee and talking. And as soon as your eyes went up, they painted the top these terrible clashing colors that were just putrid, blue, yucco, appetite killing. Oh, let's get out of here, right? People, and the place worked exactly like they were told, but the preconception was wrong. That isn't what made a successful restaurant. People came once and they never came back because it wasn't a comfortable place to eat. Ponderosa ripped out the seats, changed them, tilted them back, put in free things, stay all you want, have free coffee. You've seen the new advertising at least. That probably won't make a difference. The food's still lousy, but they realized that wasn't the way to have a successful restaurant. That wasn't what made a restaurant successful. That they had been all wrong. Their conventional wisdom, their directives were absolutely wrong. And I think that's what landscape architects are still doing in a lot of design. We're still operating on this notion that we think we know what's good for people. And I don't think we've ever really, in large measure, explored a lot of those things adequately.
How's the best way to go about that?
Interviews, study, research, discussion. I mean, social research, right? I mean, you should do interviews with people who use land. I mean, instead of talking to us, instead of 20 old fogies, you should talk to 40 real people who use landscape space and how they react to it. And I mean, that's probably, I don't know how you do it. Social research.
And come up with new.
Really, I mean, I would like to see all the graduate students who do these theses. I keep trying to convince them to take something that's held as conventional wisdom now and really explore it, really rip it apart and see if it's true or not. It's amazing how much of it's wrong. It's just not right.
And that's so often the case with so many things that we do. You just keep doing it because it's been done.
You keep doing it
because it's been
of course. Every architect in Canada, almost, okay, is still putting airlock doors from the 70s and the energy crunch in their houses. I sat in a room with a bunch of I was part of a team that got one of the new super houses, these 12 or 10 demonstration houses across Canada that are 100% better than R2000 in terms of energy performance. And we spent, and this is with a group of really smart engineers and smart designers and really smart people. I mean, this is a room full of smart people. Spent a whole day trying to figure out just what problems there were to solve in this house. What are the real issues? We spent a whole day talking about that. And it's amazing how few things we could come up with. Really important issues in a home design for ultimate energy saving that we could come up with. I mean, we talked about embodied energy, and we talked about reducing commuting time and reducing the need of people to, make so many auto trips from the home, and designing for more in-home work and in-home office and making it just a better place to live in. So you could do that, and energy. And I was amazed as I sat there because I assumed, I came up with preconceptions and value judgments, just laden with them, right? And I assumed we'd have airlock doors and stuff. And the engineer said, no, why would we want one of those? They're no good. They don't do anything. By actual test, you can demonstrate that if you've got a modern designed house with controlled ventilation and CO sensors that control ventilation based on actual requirements for ventilation, that there's no savings with an airlock door with modern doors, which seal pretty much absolutely now. That they're just a waste of money and space. And I just sat there. I mean, that was the fact that they could actually demonstrate this in a laboratory. I found rather interesting, because that was just one of the things that I would have said and assumed would be part of this ultimately energy efficient house.
So, do you think that it behooves the schools that are teaching landscape architecture, and especially at the graduate level in Canada, to be having students do studies like this to find out what the preconceived notions are and to start getting some information out there? I don't know. Does information come out from graduate schools? No,
I don't know. No, it doesn't. I just think it would be interesting. I just think it would be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was thinking of a thesis topic, if I were a graduate student today thinking of a thesis topic, in fact, that's what I've been doing some research work for CMHC and for other groups. We've got several research projects, and we've been looking at what's of interest to me right now is how the planning from the 70s has screwed up our cities so badly that it's, I mean, like, what do they become? I mean, you look at the old cities and you see these incredibly dynamic mixes of people and everything going on. And then planning became putting the right color on the right square. And, you had to go to green to be for recreation. You had to go to a green part of the plan. And to live, you had to go to a yellow part. And to work, you had to go to a purple or a red part, or maybe a blue part if you worked in an institution, right? But I mean, that's what planning was putting these nice pure colors. In fact, one of the first basic planning textbooks, Canadian planning textbooks, were these standard plan colors that were published, standard colors for plans, right? Industrial, heavy industrial, light industrial, single, so that you knew, so you could pick the right color for your plan, right? It was just, I mean, if you think about it, everyone just went away and did that for years. I mean, and we're still living with, we got all these industrial parks, which are, I mean, talk about asinine use of land. I mean, when we started doing this research, we had our students doing research on industrial parks, and we're doing a large industrial ecology study, really looking at what is the ecology of an industrial park, way beyond just input output for, you know, like waste recycling and stuff like that, and solvent recycling, and trying to really look at what is the ecology of an industrial park. And students were taking various parts of this and looking at them as they were interested in it. And the things they were finding, like, well, I said, you know, the Soho is an old industrial park, and now it's some of the most expensive housing in North America. What are our modern industrial parks going to be in 100 years? So the students, given that question, go off and, well, can they convert to housing? Can you do housing? Can you, what? Well, you can't. I mean, the dimensions are just exquisitely bad. Everything, it's amazing how single-minded we've become and how disposable everything's become. It's really depressing. I mean, and the industrial park, the modern industrial park, is just a magnificent example of how single-minded and disposably, I mean, the buildings are disposable. They're like paper towels. They're like styrofoam cups. They're like not convertible. They're not recyclable. I mean, 40 to 60% of our landfills are construction waste. I mean, we look at, I mean, it's just, there's got to be something for landscape architects in just re-looking at how we do all of these things in looking at the landscape. These are the landscape. They're part of the landscape. And the students came back finding all the, like, you can't put housing in here because if the buildings were just 10 feet further apart, you could use it. Or if it was just, you know, if this building was just 2 foot taller, it could be recycled for housing, or 2 feet shorter, or something. Everything they tried, you know, they would set up all these tests, and everything was just a little bit wrong, because everything was designed just for that and without any thought of any other use other than today. Just amazing. Just, so you'll probably be hanging around industrial parks for a few more years till we get this sorted out. We're going for phase 2 of all this research. So. You'll see the housing study published by CMHC.
Oh, good. I think we're just about out of time. Thank you very much for taking time to talk with me, Peter. Hope that we maybe continue this if we've got questions and things.
Sure.